Hello and welcome back to the second part of our International COVID-19 online conference as we start the work with the third group of our experts. We will start by talking with Dr. Irena Tabain and Tatiana Vilibic-Chawlek from the Reference Center of the Ministry of Health for Virological Diagnostics of Respiratory and Digestive System Infections in Croatia, who will, as far as I understand, deliver a joint presentation on diagnosing SARS-CoV-2 and the Croatian experience with this topic. Dr. Tabain, Dr. Vilibic-Chawlek, do we have you online?
Okay, yes, we are online.
Yep, I'm hearing you. So, are we waiting for your colleague, or will you present your speech subsequently?
We will present subsequently.
Oh,
so
great.
We are all here together.
Please go ahead.
Okay, hello everyone. I'm here in front of the Croatian Institute of Public Health Virology Department, and I will present in short our experience with COVID diagnostics. Do you see the change of the slide?
Yes, it's all working.
Yes, okay. So in Croatia, the first case occurred on 25th of February, right after the start of the outbreak in Italy. And until yesterday, we have around 16,000 confirmed cases and 2,072 deaths. So the approach that we used is the molecular testing in the beginning. So detection of RNA of coronavirus for symptomatic or suspected cases. And later when serology tests came, then we started to use serology as well for those that were not detected or for seroprevalence study. Here in our department, we have BSL-2 cabinets, so we could start from the beginning with diagnostics based on RT-PCR. First, we started with Corman protocol from Charité, and later we made some modification, and now we mostly use protocol from the Pasteur Institute and some certificate IVD tests. So we also conducted seroprevalence studies to determine the real number of the infection after the lockdown. We validated some point of care tests and ELISA tests. We also implemented virus neutralization test, which measure neutralization antibodies against SARS-CoV-2 virus in patient serum. We were lucky that we could use BSL-3 laboratory from TB department, and the virus strain that we isolated was from nasopharyngeal swab of COVID-19 patient. We used Viro E6 cells, and we use those cells for the neutralization, for the detection of neutralization antibody. It was very important for us to implement VNT because VNT is the gold standard for confirmatory serological testing. And since we implemented VNT, we were managed to validate new serological tests that came on the market during the time. So we validated 3 point of care tests and 3 enzyme immunoassays. And what we found is that we were able to detect IgM and or IgA antibodies and IgG antibodies in COVID-19 patients. For IgM or IgA, it was successful from 60% up to almost 87% for Vircel. And for IgG, it was around 67 up to 73%. And for the asymptomatic persons, negative results. These tests were quite accurate, around above 90% for IgG in asymptomatic persons. And since the virus is present in the population, and during the lockdown we couldn't say how many people were infected, the prevalence study was conducted in Zagreb, and the seroprevalence was 2.7%. And since the virus is transmitted by droplet, we analyzed the presence of the virus around the patients in their homes, and we found, using also RT-PCR, the RNA of the virus in 3 specimens from 41 analyzed, so around 7% was found, mostly on the mobile phone, joystick, and the window knob. So those are the things that are mostly touched by the patient, and it was expected to find it there. And at the end, I would like to thank my colleagues that help with the diagnostics, and especially Dr. Zmak, that allow us to use their facility and equipment for the virus isolation. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. And if we might, it will be easier to, we have some questions for your team, but it will be probably easier to first ask some of them to you, and then some of them to your colleague. First off, do we already have any insight as to why in some cases the COVID-19 appears to be asymptomatic? Because it's, when we stop to think about it, it's really quite widespread in that some people can die from it in a matter of days, and others simply not even notice they've been infected.
Well, it's hard to tell why some people are symptomatic and others are asymptomatic, but it's well known for virology infections that we have a lot of, especially for respiratory viruses, a lot of asymptomatic cases. So it's not actually strange that we have so many asymptomatic carriers of the virus.
Mm-hmm. I understand. And on the other hand, as everybody present here understands, one of the big problems with studying the COVID-19 is that it's so new, it's so fresh, and we had so little time to spend researching it to really have any long-term perspective. But as we speak right now, do we already have any possible insights into possible long-term consequences of going through a COVID infection?
It's really hard to tell. We are not clinicians. We are only from the diagnostic laboratories. So it's really hard to tell, but probably the virus will be present in the circulation for a long time. And after, and probably need more time to give some possible consequences.
I understand.
A little bit too early to say now.
I understand. Thank you. And let's perhaps see the other part of this topic as presented by your colleague.
Thank you for the invitation.
Thank you.
Here is my colleague, Tatiana Vilibic. Do you see?
Yes.
Okay.
Hello, Professor.
Okay, hello.
Hello and welcome. Yes, feel free to begin whenever you're ready. And I also want to assure you that despite having some troubles with timing earlier, right now we've got plenty of time, so don't feel rushed, and please just tell whatever you feel is important for the community we've gathered here.
Okay, can I start now?
Of course.
Okay, yes. First, I would like to thank you for the invitation to participate at this conference, and I would like to introduce myself. I work also at Department of Virology at Croatian Institute of Public Health, and now I will present the results of our seroprevalence study conducted among personnel of the healthcare facilities in Croatia. Coronavirus disease is an acute respiratory disease caused by severe acute respiratory syndrome, coronavirus 2. Human-to-human transmission occurs through close contact and respiratory droplets. Since the initial surveillance focused primarily on the symptomatic COVID-19 patients, the extent of mild or asymptomatic infection is unclear. Healthcare personnel represent a risk group due to frequent direct or indirect exposure to patients or infected materials. Therefore, the estimation of asymptomatic and mild cases, including healthcare workers, is important for understanding of COVID-19 transmission. The aim of our study was to analyze the seroprevalence of COVID-19 in different professionally exposed populations in Croatia. From April 25 to May 24, when the COVID-19 epidemic curve was approaching the end of the first wave in Croatia, we analyzed a total of 592 serum samples from healthcare workers. Convenient samples were collected from 6 counties with a high incidence of COVID-19, 3 counties from continental Croatia, and also 3 countries located at the Croatian littoral. WHO defined healthcare workers as all people at healthcare facilities involved in the provision of care for COVID-19 patients, as well as those who may not have provided direct care to patients, but may have come in contact with patients' body fluids, potentially contaminated materials or devices, and also equipment linked to patients or environmental surfaces. According to this protocol, our study group included healthcare professionals working at different hospital and emergency wards, laboratory personnel included in the phlebotomy and SARS coronavirus 2 diagnostic units, patient transporters, clinic personnel, and some other groups like social workers and administrative workers. And at the beginning of the study, all participants included filled out a questionnaire regarding the sociodemographic information, clinical symptoms, and possible exposure to COVID-19. Do you see my presentation or no slides?
No, we are seeing you yourselves.
Okay, I don't.
I believe your presentation is in a small window in the corner. With your main screen being the camera.
Do you see now?
It's in the corner. Your main view is, oh yeah, now it's as you wish.
Is it okay?
Yeah. Now it works all right.
Yes. Share screen. Is it okay now? Yes.
Yep.
Okay. Serum samples were initially screened for the presence of IgG antibodies, and reactive samples were further tested for the presence of IgM and IgG antibodies. Serological tests were performed using a commercial enzyme-linked immunosorbent assay using spike glycoprotein in nucleocapsid protein antigens. And after that, all initially positive samples were confirmed using a virus microneutralization test. Here you can see occupational exposure of our study participants. 25.3% were from infectious disease wards, and the other 75% were from other departments, and also includes cleaning personnel and administrative workers. In the tested group, there were 152 or 25.7% of males and 440 females. As a possible risk factors, 10.5% of participants reported traveling to an area with documented COVID-19 circulation, 19.6% reported participation in large community events, 18.2% contact with confirmed COVID-19 case, and COVID-compatible symptoms were reported by 50.7%. Using ELISA, IgG antibodies were detected in 16 or 2.7%, and IgM and IgG antibodies were detected in 9 or 1.5%. However, neutralizing antibodies in titers greater than 8, which was considered positive, were detected in 9 or 1.5%. Among 9 seropositive participants, 7 were healthcare workers, including 1 medical doctor, nurses and technicians, and 2 seropositive persons were administrative workers. All but 1 healthcare workers worked in the infectious disease department, and only 1 medical doctor was a psychiatrist, and he had a contact with COVID-19 case in his family. 3 healthcare workers reported clinical symptoms in the past 2 months, and 5 participants were also RT-PCR positive. In all seropositive persons, both high titers of IgG and IgM and IgA antibodies were detected, and virus neutralization titers ranged from 32 to 256. In conclusion, our results indicate that SARS coronavirus 2 seroprevalence in healthcare facilities in Croatia is low, which indicates that protective measures have been effective. However, due to a small number of patients included in the study, further large-scale seroepidemiological studies are needed to confirm these first preliminary results. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. I've had one question for you, though honestly you've probably answered it already with the conclusion, but if you would be speaking less of medical personnel in particular, but more generally, do you think our current way of I'm asking because of your work gathering those samples. Do you think our current approach of basically disinfecting hands in public spaces and maybe tables or chairs and so is generally enough for the populace at large, or should we start promoting more serious approach to it, such as, for example, disinfecting one's own home to avoid cross-contamination?
I think that use of disinfectants is very important, as well as wearing masks, and also I think it's important it's important for to social distancing.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much, Professor. So yes, that's it for our 2 professors from Croatia, and now we will turn to Dr. Arsen Arakelyan, the director of the Institute of Molecular Biology of the National Academy of Science of the Republic of the Armenia, and also the director of the Institute of Biomedicine and Pharmacy of the Russian Armenian University. He'll be with us in a minute, speaking about establishing a local production of COVID-19 PCR tests. Welcome, Professor Arakelyan.
Right. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. So yes, we're live and we are very glad to have you here with us. So please proceed at your own convenience.
Yeah, thanks very much, and thank you for inviting me to this renowned conference. I'm really happy to be part of it. So I would like to share our experience on the way how we try to control COVID-19 epidemic situation in Armenia, especially by trying to increase the testing capacity using different options and studies to understand what would be the efficient strategy. So Armenia first faced COVID-19 in 1st of March this year, when the first case was confirmed by PCR, and since then we have around 50,000 cases totally confirmed COVID-19 positive, and up to date there is almost 300,000 tests performed. So from the very beginning of the pandemic, it was obvious that the increasing of testing capacity and testing efforts is a key for controlling the situation with COVID-19 in countries. However, at the same time, I think the most countries experienced huge problems with purchasing the diagnostic tests and also equipment for performing testing on site. Especially this was because of obviously the limits of air transport and ground transportation, closing the borders and limiting traffic. And this shortage actually severely affected and was mainly with the stations that could allow automatic extraction for nucleic acid, since this is one of the most elaborate part of the PCR testing workflow. And in Armenia, we mostly did and now do manual isolation for RNA samples, RNA from the nasopharyngeal swab samples for patients and or other tested subjects. But it takes a long time, and also it requires significant and actually expert work, and can result in errors and also limits the possibility to extend testing capacity. Along with that, we also had shortage with tests, actually, which were very few of them were on the market already approved and sold. So we decided here to take over and start local production for the test according to the protocols recommended by WHO and that were validated in different countries. And another advantage it gives us the ability to try to optimize these protocols for more fast versions for PCR testing, like with direct samples without nucleic acid extraction. So we started to assemble our own test kit. We used the recommendations by China CDC on testing targets. This would be the ORF-AB and NGene. We tried several different options, but we stopped on the one test QRT, quantitative reverse transcription PCR option, and we chose the primer mixes, which allowed us to do it relatively quickly. So the PCR reaction by itself takes only up to 70 minutes if we go for full 45 cycles. Before starting to use our test, we performed several validations at our laboratories. We established the limit of detection, which was about 200 copies per microliter. We also compared the sensitivity, accuracy, sensitivity, and specificity of our test with the already purchased CE-IVD tests. With 72 samples, which were RNA samples, which were isolated both manually and in automated way. we were able to obtain accuracy compared to this CIVD test of about 98%, with sensitivity to 98% and specificity to 100%, which really shows that our tests, which were assembled here from, let's say, raw materials, showed almost the same accuracy and efficiency as it would have been purchased with the CIVD mark. So we started to produce them locally and distributed to testing sites. It worked very well with extracted RNA samples, but to extend the capacity of testing, we decided to go further and try to optimize them to work directly with nasopharyngeal swab samples without RNA extraction. So at that time, there were several protocols published, and we decided to go with the heat inactivation direct PCR approach. We tested two versions, one with just heat inactivation and PCR. Another was with heat inactivation and then pelleting of the cells from this nasopharyngeal swab. We thought that it would increase the sensitivity of detection. Indeed, compared to just heat inactivation, the pelleting, heat inactivation and pelleting allowed us to reach about 90% of accuracy, sensitivity, and specificity. We also detected that in some cases, RNA extraction, like if we compare the top curves and bottom curves, for some cases we saw that heat inactivation and pelleting was more sensitive and gave us lower CT values compared to RNA isolation samples, which could suggest that there were some degradation processes during the extraction of nucleic acids, and this could be overcome by simply using direct version of direct nasopharyngeal swab samples. And though the overall accuracy was around 90%, we saw that with RNA sample CT values more than 34, which means they're higher, less than 34, which means higher viral concentration. The accuracy also increased and increased dramatically. So when we go further the limit of detection, we were able to achieve 97% of sensitivity and accuracy using direct nasopharyngeal swab samples. This was performed on 74 patients. Then we also decided to investigate how detection depends on different transportation media for swab samples. And indeed, depending on what swab sample transportation media we used, we got considerable variation in detection sensitivity and accuracy. Which means that actually we have to, before starting with direct PCR testing, these parameters should be checked and some background things should be established at the beginning. So our experience showed that basically detection in direct samples increases with the increase of viral particle concentrations. We also detected that transport media and composition of transport media could be essential factor for sensitivity of direct PCR. Other factors such as storage, conditions of storage, and time of storage of samples should be also considered. And each laboratory, before starting with direct PCR, should validate performance of these particular methods. And also, in order to achieve more or less homogeneous data, the sample collection procedure and media should also be maximally standardized across the different testing sites, at least in one country. Next, we performed some calculations to understand at what levels the transition from extraction PCR to direct PCR would be reasonable. And our calculations with very pessimistic accuracy of 88%. This was the minimal accuracy we saw within our in our studies. It becomes more efficient when the testing capacity is increased around from 1.5 to 2 times. With 2 times increasing of testing, amount of testing, we would be able to achieve more than 70% of more positive cases identified. And actually, in Armenia, we did transition from nucleic acid PCR, extraction PCR, to direct sample PCR somewhere in the beginning of September. And you can see that the number of testing goes up to 2 times. And direct testing PCR was very efficient solution when we started to test teachers before opening the schools. And with this, the main conclusions are that actually local optimization and production of PCR tests from ready enzyme mixes and primers can actually help to overcome the test kit shortage we experience worldwide. Compared to nucleic acid extraction, direct samples produce more false negative, but direct PCR methods can really boost testing capacity up to several folds. And switching to direct sample testing is justified if number of tests is at least doubled, and it doesn't matter the general rate of infection in population, whatever the rate, it really allows to detect at least increased detection, let's say at least for 50 to 70%. With this, I would like to thank all colleagues of ours which helped us with this particular project and test production, especially our international colleagues from Karolinska Institute, from National Applied Biology Lab at Shenyang University of Chemical Technology in China, Seeding Labs Foundation for helping us to purchase equipment, and all my colleagues from Armenia that participated both at studies, at research activities, as well as at production activities. Thanks very much for having me here.
Thank you very much, Professor. And now we've already got our next speaker on the line, Professor Chil-Yong Kang from the Schulich University of Western Ontario. Welcome, Professor.
Thank you very much.
So yeah, here we are live. We are extremely glad to have you on our conference, and please begin whenever you're ready.
All right. Thank you for inviting me to present our strategy for SARS-CoV-2 vaccine development. There are about 150 different vaccines being developed around the world, and every strategy uses this spike protein of coronavirus. And the idea is that we can make neutralizing antibodies which can cover up these spike proteins so that they cannot interact with cellular receptor ACE2. And so you can prevent infections. And we too use the full-length SARS-CoV-2 spike protein. And there are many different strategies being used to develop vaccines. And live attenuated virus vaccines kill the whole virus vaccine, protein-based vaccines or virus-like particles, and nucleic acid vaccines, DNA and RNA. And also, there are 2 different kinds of recombinant virus vaccines. One is replication incompetent, such as adenovirus 26, Ad5, and chimpanzee adeno, or replication competent virus. And we are using replication competent VSV, vesicular stomatitis virus, as the vector. The VSV system has tremendous advantages. First of all, it has a very wide host range, including human, 2 antigenically distinct serotypes, VSV Indiana serotype and VSV New Jersey serotype. Now, the VSV Indiana serotype, antibodies made against this does not neutralize VSV New Jersey. Therefore, it is ideal to make a prime boost vaccines. So you can insert the same genes into VSP Indiana and VSP New Jersey. You can prime vaccinate with VSP Indiana vector and then followed with the VSP New Jersey vector, and that you will have a very good boost effect. So ideal for the prime boost vaccination. We have generated 2 different mutants of these the viruses, VSP Indiana and the GML, which has 3 mutations in M gene, and VSP New Jersey has also 3 mutations in M gene. These are all avirulent. They are extremely safe. And also VSP can produce over 1 billion infectious virus particles per milliliter of cultured fluid after 10 hours of infection. So there's no problem producing large quantities of vaccines. And the virus itself can accommodate as much as 6,000 bases between the G and L genes of the VSP. And the inserted gene gives us a very high expression levels. So what we are doing is we take the reading frame 2, open reading frame that has a spike protein gene. So we take this spike protein gene and dissect it. So first of all, we use a full-length spike protein gene and S1 alone, and also just to cut out this RBD, which is a receptor binding domain. And since this is the middle of the S1 gene, and that does not have a signal peptide, so we add external signal peptide in order to make this RBD glycosylated and secreted. So we have those combinations, and we constructed recombinant VSP Indiana and the VSP Indiana New Jersey, consist of the full-length spike protein gene and the modified spike protein gene, which consists of the MSP, which is melatonin signal peptide, which will really enhance the glycosylation and secretion of this spike protein. And also at the end of the C-terminus, we put the GTC. This is VSP glycoprotein transmembrane domain and cytoplasmic tail, so that this protein can be associated with the virus particles when it expresses. And also we have S1 without the modification and S1 with the modification. We have the melatonin signal peptide and GTC. And we also constructed RBD with envelope protein and RBD with envelope protein with GTC at the C-terminus. So we have a total of 6 different constructs. And we checked it out whether we can find these proteins in the supernatant or in the pellet. And so we have done, this is RBD construction. We can find the virus protein RBD in infected cells and also in the supernatant and the pelleted fractions. Pelleted fraction means that it is associated with the virus particles. And we have S1, we can see that S1 with and without modification, and this is in the supernatant, and also S1 with the GTC is associated with the virus particles. And the full-length S and contains also full-length S in the infected cells, cytoplasm, and this is pelleted, so that the full-length S protein is also associated with the virus particles. And this is antibody against S2, so you can detect full-length S and also S2. So using these, we vaccinated mice, 10 mice in each group, and we have used empty vectors, and we have used MSP. This is full-length S without modification, full-length S with modification, S1 without modification, S1 with modification, and RBD E without modification, and RBD plus E with modifications. And we vaccinated animals. And after 13 days, this is Indiana serotype, we vaccinated with a prime immunization, followed with the New Jersey, and the 13 days post-immunization we bled, and then 14 days prime immunization, we also boost immunized, and we collected the serum on the 27th. difference. So we look at, this is total antibody productions. When you look at the neutralizing antibodies using the FRNT50 assay, and initially we found that the highest dilution, we did not expect that much higher than 2560, 1 in 2560 like dilution of the serum will neutralize the virus. But it turns out that this morning, and our new data shows that it is over 20,000, 1 in 20,000 dilutions can still neutralize virus infectivity. This is incredible level of neutralizing antibody titers that we have received. So this is a highly efficient system to make neutralizing antibodies. And we believe that this neutralizing antibody will prevent interaction between spike protein and cellular receptor ACE2. So when we purify the virus and to see where this protein is, and it turns out that the protein, we can find it in the virus particles. We can see that MSP S1 GTC is associated with the virus particle. Now this is a purified virus by the column chromatography. RBD is associated with the virus particles. S1 is associated with virus particles, and also full length S with modification and without modification of S1 is associated with Indiana as well as in New Jersey. You can find that. And also S2 is also associated with the virus particles. So what we see is this. We have a pseudotype virus particles of VSV consist of not only the VSV G protein, glycoprotein of VSV, but it contains also full-length S, S1, or RBD plus E associated with this. This is highly efficient immunogen to generate neutralizing antibodies. And I want to make sure to mention that our full-length spike protein gene with modification, we can get over 1 billion infectious virus particles per milliliter and in 10 hours of incubation. Now, successful COVID-19 vaccine should require 3 things. First of all, it has to be effective. Secondly, it has to be safe. And thirdly, it should have a highly efficient production system. And we can generate enormous amount of the viruses with this. So we have no problem in supplying this. For the next step, we are now negotiating with the CMO. It's a contracted manufacturing organization in the manufacture this vaccine in GMP facility in Ottawa, Canada. And we'll do this GLP testing after we manufacture this. And it will go into the phase 1-2 trials in Korea, Canada, and or USA. And also phase 3 clinical trials, we will conduct this in Canada, USA, or maybe India and Brazil. And we will produce this COVID-19 vaccine in GMP facilities in selected CMOs for the worldwide distribution. I think that we have system which will provide those 3 conditions for successful COVID-19 vaccines. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Professor, for this enlightening presentation. And now we are going to connect with our next speaker, Dr. Cristiana Happi, the director of the African Center of Excellence in Infectious Disease Genomics at the University of Vladimir in Nigeria. Welcome, Professor. Professor Happi, can you hear us?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Welcome to our conference then, and please proceed at your leisure.
I lost you.
I want to say, to welcome you to our conference. Thank you for the participation, and to begin the presentation at your leisure.
Well, thank you. Well, I'm here to talk about, genomics, SARS-CoV-2 genomics in Africa, and then how we were able to use genomic epidemiology to characterize SARS-CoV-2 and then set up a network of a genomic network in Africa in order to understand transmission, evolution, and the spread of the virus. And we did this in collaboration with the African Center for Disease Control through the Pathogen Genomic Initiative of the African Center for Disease Control. And as such, they set up a network, and then we were part of that network, where in Africa they have a network of national laboratory, regional labs, and then reference lab. My laboratory, which is the African Center of Excellence for Genomic of Infectious Disease at Redeemers University in Nigeria, where I'm the director, and I'm also a professor of molecular biology and genomics in this university. We basically serve as a reference lab in addition to the African Pathogen Genomic Initiative, along with the CRISP, which is a KwaZulu-Natal Research Institute on genomics and surveillance. So what we did was basically to start applying genomic tools early on in the pandemic in Africa in order to characterize the virus or the entries of the viruses to determine what we call community transmission, and also to evaluate and assess regularly, transmission and then the spread of the virus over time. One of the major findings, or what we've observed so far is that, the viruses in Africa were mainly imported in Africa, and we have more than 1,000 importation from across the different countries of the continent. And this importation came mainly from Europe, and then followed by Asia, and then America. And through this importation, we were able to establish that the number of lineages in Africa presently vary between 3 to 10, depending on the country where you are. Where I am in Nigeria, for instance, we have about over 10 different lineages of SARS-CoV-2 circulating in the country. And in other countries, it varies. In Kenya, they have about 7. And I'm sure in South Africa, they also have about 10 different lineages. And we've also been able to establish, use genomics as a way to establish community transmission across various countries in Africa. For instance, in Kenya, that was established, and then they were able to demonstrate, for instance, transmission, importation, or what they call in-country transmission from major cities like Nairobi to Mombasa. In South Africa, for instance, they were able to establish community transmission within hospitals, and then how hospital workers or healthcare workers were able to move, these viruses from from the hospital where they work and where they got infected in their communities. In Nigeria, for instance, we were able to establish, community transmission in many states in the country. And despite the lockdown, we were able to use genomic tools as a way to demonstrate that the lockdown wasn't working very well, because we were able to show some lineages that existed in certain states before the lockdown, and then we saw them appearing in some neighboring states during the lockdown and even after. And looking at how the virus evolves over time, we definitely showed, using genomic, whole genome sequencing approach, we showed that, for instance, the introduction of, or the rise of a new mutation, the mutation, or the D614G mutation in the spike protein, that lead to increased transmissibility and also pathogenesis, as demonstrated in some places in Europe. We showed clearly that that virus really has been rising in Africa. In some places, there's about 80% prevalence. So that virus is really taking over in many places in the continent. And this really shows that, this particular mutant, has the ability to take over once it gets introduced in a community. In addition to this, we were able to demonstrate that within Africa transmission, that is transmission from one country to the other across the continent. And, using such approach, we showed how viruses, migrated from different countries in Africa, from countries to others within Africa. And this probably could be through land borders, a migrant through land borders, and this really also was very revealing in the sense that, human migration actually plays a major role in terms of transmission and the spread of this pandemic. And in nutshell, I know I do have about 5 minutes or 6 minutes to talk. I was told in this regard, I think Africa has moved dramatically from the era in 2014 in Ebola, where there was really no genomic epidemiology in the continent, and embraced this new technology as a way to move what I call surveillance and then outbreak response. So through this, for instance, this approach, we work in very close collaboration in every country with the Ministry of Health, and also with the African CDC. And this information that I just provided you have been transmitted are transmitted in real time, for instance, to the Ministries of Health or the Centers of Disease Control of the various countries where we are working in Africa as a network. And this might be one of the reasons because that Africa is probably responding well to this pandemic, because they are using this information as evidence in order to actually formulate or to guide outbreak response in many places. Through genomic epidemiology, for instance, we've been able to identify the hotspots and then the sync across various countries. And then this information become very crucial when it comes to the containment and developing the strategies in order to contain the outbreak or the pandemic in different countries and in different regions of the continent. So in nutshell, I think we have definitely embraced this approach and work in collaboration with the Center for Disease Controls in Africa, the Public Health Institute in Africa. And then this is one of those examples where we can use, academics and then public health come together and effectively use technology as a way to respond to an outbreak, and then use such information as a way to, to provide necessary, very critical information, that are very important in order to guide outbreak response and then coordinate outbreak response across the continent. In addition to just using the genomic epidemiology or generating, genetic sequences for the SARS-CoV-2 virus, what we've done in the case of my own laboratory is actually to use this information to develop, what I call a CRISPR-based, Cas13-based rapid diagnostic test, for SARS-CoV-2 or for COVID-19. This test is presently being validated in Nigeria and other countries in Africa. We've been able to show that this test really compares very well with PCR sensitivity, 96%, and then specificity very close to 99%. And this really is going to be a major game changer, because this is not just an antigen capture assay, it is rather a nucleic acid-based assay. And we're basically using CRISPR or gene editing technology as a way, to quickly respond and then to quickly detect, these viruses. And this is one of those examples where within a pandemic of this nature, we're able to use both, genomics and then technologies as a way to develop countermeasure in order to help Africa to respond to the pandemic. And I just believe that, this is probably one of those examples moving forward, how Africa has been able to embrace and adopt, novel technologies like, not only genomics, but also using that as a platform to develop countermeasures, to contain an outbreak or a pandemic like this one. So in summary, I think my talk is basically focusing on the fact that, Africa has come a long way, because some people are asking, why is Africa doing this well compared to others generally? It's all because we learned a lot from the previous outbreak, that is Ebola in 2014, and then the other outbreak in Africa, like Lassa fever, yellow fever, cholera. So we basically in this outbreak response mode in Africa, we've learned a lot from that, and we basically just leverage, the lessons learned over the years, so that we can actually apply those lessons learned to respond to this pandemic. So at this point, I think I really don't want to take too much of the time that was allotted to me. I think at this point, I will be willing to take some questions, or when the time arises. Over.
Thank you very much, Professor. And I was about to ask a thing or two. However, we'll have a very lucky sequence of guests here, because we'll basically, our next speaker will basically follow up on exactly what you've said. So I think we'd rather go there and perhaps paint a bigger picture, especially for our colleagues from other regions. And in a minute, we'll speak with Mosoka Fallah from the National Institute of Public Health of Liberia. Professor Fallah was the principal investigator of the largest cohort study of Ebola survivors in Liberia. And today he will tell us about the lessons that he learned, and hopefully will be able to enact in our current struggle with COVID-19. Welcome, Professor.
Thank you very much. It is an honor to be invited to share some of the experience we had from Ebola, even though there are some differences between Ebola and COVID-19. Ebola has a high mortality rate, but the transmission is not as high as COVID-19. We know that COVID has a very high transmission rate. However, in 2014 and 2015, Liberia, Sierra Leone, and Guinea saw a high increase of Ebola cases. There were over 11,000 deaths. Liberia alone had 4,800 deaths. One of the things that we realized very quickly was the importance of a laboratory. We never had labs in Liberia. Basically, when Ebola started in Liberia, the specimen had to be taken to Europe or to other countries to be tested. And in that way, we lost time. The time it took to take the specimen to Europe and get tested and send the result, it made us to move contact tracing to be slower. So in major outbreak, whether it is COVID-19 or it is Ebola, there are two key issues. The issue of testing by laboratory, and the issue of contact tracing. Contact tracing does not work if there are no laboratory results. You need to have effective laboratory results to know who are the cases and who are the contact. The third part we learn is the issue of social mobilization. The people must be willing to work with you, to trust you. If the people trust you, then contact tracing can be effective. That was a key lesson we realized, that to be prepared for any outbreak, we needed to have a laboratory. And so at the close of Ebola or during the Ebola, with the assistance from the US government and other international institutions, we developed a very strong molecular lab. That lab was used even after Ebola ended to go for diseases like Lassa fever. And so when COVID-19 started in China, we initiated a quick preparedness for laboratory testing. One or two of our colleagues were sent to the Institut Pasteur in Senegal for training. And then we set up the entire testing system with support from WHO. We're able to get in country the testing kit. And so on March 15, when we have our first suspected case, we're on the go ready to test. And so we ramp up our testing capacity. So the first thing we realized from Ebola is that without a test, you cannot do effective contact tracing. If you do not do effective contact tracing, people will die or people will get sick. And when people get sick, the community will not trust you. And so you need to have at the fundamental testing. We had some challenges with testing during the COVID. Most of the African countries had limited supplies of testing kit. And to solve that problem, we saw that the African CDC based in Addis Ababa, play a very key role. And so the second key lesson we learned is that regional collaboration is critical because each country has comparative advantage. Regional collaboration in the control of COVID is critical. Because we had limited supply of laboratory testing equipment, the African CDC was able to work with the Jack Ma Foundation and they sent tons of supply to Ethiopia. What we also have learned is that the use of regional airlines, airplanes leaving from Ethiopia were able to distribute laboratory kit across all the countries. For a long-term flight in Africa is difficult. It is easier to leave from France to Liberia than to leave from Senegal to Liberia. But we saw that under the COVID, through the coordination of the African CDC, we're able to surmount that difficulties. So regional collaboration, building testing infrastructure, and an effective contact tracing. Contact tracing can be developed ad hoc. Contact tracing should not be emergency. Whenever you have an outbreak, start to prepare people for contact tracing. Even in communities where there are no outbreak, those communities should be prepared. They should have the contact tracer trained, having the skill set. And one key thing for trust, never ever import contact tracers. Use the local people in their community as contact tracers because they know their community and they build trust. So if you ask me in short, the first key thing is a laboratory system. Building a laboratory system that will support contact tracing, working with communities to build trust, regional collaboration, because there is comparative advantage and it brings resources and knowledge transfer together. These are key things. What are some of the mistakes we've made? One key mistake is that we have securitization of response. That is the use of the military and the police to create lockdown. The excessive use of the police and military across Africa has created problems. In countries like Cote d'Ivoire, there were riots. In East Africa, and some people died. So there's a fine balance between lockdown and careful response and the abuse of human rights. Thank you very much. As a key lesson again, testing, contact tracing, trust, regional collaboration, and the lack of use of excessive force. Human rights must be respected. Thank you very much, and I can take questions.
Yeah, thank you, Professor. And I do, in fact, have one question. The common thread of your speech and that of Professor Happi is the impact the Ebola epidemic had on epidemiology in African countries, of the lesson that ended up creating the infrastructure, the technology, the procedures to deal with this kind of threat. Do you think the current struggle with the COVID-19 pandemic could have similar impact in how we deal with epidemic or how we perceive the epidemic, either professionally or as a public, how it approaches the topic of viral pandemics?
That's a very key question you brought. Our current experiences of COVID-19 can do one of two things for us. Maybe our overreaction or responsive nature, the issue of securitarization, the use of military, may affect our response in the future. However, the rate at which we have developed technology and procedure, the time frame by which we have developed vaccine, the struggle of regional collaboration, these are critical things that we can learn and use for future epidemics. The thing that we cannot afford to do is to forget soon. We realize humanity tend to forget when the threat goes away. But for us in Africa from the Ebola, we realized that it was not a matter of if, it was a question of when. And so we kept the infrastructure in place for the next epidemic. So the world needs to learn one thing. We cannot forget. We must be able to keep these lessons learned, these technologies, this regional collaboration, this global collaboration, the issue of supply chain. They must all be kept somehow intact or to some extent, because we do know that there will be another epidemic. We just don't know when.
Thank you very much, Professor. But now we have to keep on a schedule and meet our next guest, Professor Alla Mironenko from the Gromashevsky Institute of Epidemiology and Infectious Diseases in Ukraine. From what we've learned, it might take a minute or two as we're dealing with video problems with the connection, which will be a great opportunity to mention that Professor Mironenko doesn't speak English. She will present her speech in Russian or Ukrainian, and if possible, we'll try to help you understand to the best of our ability. Though, as you can see, maybe the presentation is in English. Welcome, Professor Mironenko. Здравствуйте. Слышите вы нас? Oh, we might still be dealing with the connection issue. Профессор Мироненко?
Да.
Слышите нас? Здравствуйте.
Добрый день.
Добрый день. Мы очень рады, что вам удалось с нами связаться. И можете начинать вашу презентацию, когда только удобно.
Хорошо. Добрый день всем. Мое сообщение посвящено насущной на сегодняшний день теме использованию системы надзора за гриппом, которая во многих странах хорошо работает и хорошо организована в новых условиях, когда мы столкнулись с другим респираторным вирусом, и надо понимать, как организованно проводить исследования для того, чтобы проводить мониторинг и за гриппом, и за COVID-19. У нас в стране дозорный надзор за гриппом был организовывался еще с 2007 года на основе 4 городов, которые расположены в разных частях, географических частях страны. И эта система надзора включала и сейчас включает 10 госпиталей и 8 амбулаторий, 8 поликлиник. Они располагаются в разных частях страны. Самым главным компонентом дозорного надзора является использование определения случая. Определение случая гриппоподобных заболеваний – это очень такое емкие такие понятия. Это включает только повышение температуры выше 38 градусов и кашель. И тяжелая острая респираторная инфекция, кроме повышения температуры выше 38 градусов и кашля, включает одышку, и пациент требует госпитализации. Вот в этом году год был нестандартный. Мы знаем, что еще с начала весны циркуляция нового коронавируса в мире началась. И как это мы сейчас увидим, как это повлияло на надзор за гриппом. Вот здесь на этом слайде представлена пропорция лабораторно подтвержденных случаев гриппа у всех госпитализированных пациентов, которые были госпитализированы в 10 дозорных клиник в сезоне 19-20 года. Мы видим, что лабораторно подтвержденные случаи регистрировались в 40-й неделе 2019 года, это октябрь месяц, и конец 13-й неделя 2020 года, то есть это конец марта. На самом деле так рано грипп не перестает циркулировать. Это количество лабораторно подтвержденных позитивных случаев в дозорных центрах Украины, и тоже мы видим вот с 40-й по 13-ю неделю. Пиковой 4-й недели, когда больше всего было лабораторно подтвержденных случаев гриппа. Таким образом мы видим, что очень обрывается сезон гриппа, потому что был введен карантин у нас в стране с 12 марта, и как ответ на пандемию эти карантинные меры, когда все сидели дома, все пользовались масками, то есть были прекращены миграционные процессы, и это повлияло на эпидемический процесс гриппа, как на эпидемиологическую, так и на вирусологическую составляющую в нашей стране. Но вот на этом графике мы видим ежедневную регистрацию, начиная с 24 марта, по нарастающее количество случаев COVID в нашей стране. И вот последние данные это 22 сентября. То есть мы видим такое интенсивное нарастание. Это синие столбики. Внизу темно-красная бордовая кривая, это количество смертей. Понятно, чем больше случаев заболевания, тем больше будет и количество смертей. Вот то, что мы имеем сейчас. Как мы можем использовать налаженную систему дозорного надзора за гриппом в стране для мониторинга за случаями COVID? Нужно использовать одни и те же клиники для мониторинга, и уже в будущем сезоне эпидемическом по гриппу, то есть это уже начиная с 1 октября, то есть с завтрашнего дня, мы начинаем проводить совместное тестирование на 2 патогена методом ПЦР. Это и на грипп, и на вирус SARS-CoV-2, который вызывает COVID-19. И очень важная рекомендация, нужно максимально увеличить количество привитых против гриппа в стране перед новым эпидемическим сезоном. Особенно это касается лиц, которые относятся к группам риска. Это пожилые люди, это люди с хроническими болезнями, но также беременные и также маленькие дети. Все это нужно для того, чтобы минимизировать и осложнения, и летальные случаи, и в том числе для улучшения дифференциальной диагностики. То есть если пациент обращается к врачу, и врач знает от пациента, что он привит против гриппа, то с большей степенью вероятности можно думать о том, что мы имеем дело с COVID-19. Ну вот, собственно, мне все. Спасибо.
Да. Спасибо большое, профессор, за ваше причастие и вашу презентацию. Но мне кажется, что сейчас мы должны уже гонить следующих экспертов. Yeah, we have thanked Professor Alla for her presentation, and if I'm not mistaken, in what's quickly becoming a theme, we'll head back to Croatia for another joint presentation by two professors from the University of Zagreb. I'm getting confirmation from the studio that, yes, in fact, we'll meet with Professor Lubo, Babic and Vladimir Stevanovic in just a minute, which we can use to present our speakers. Professor Lubo Babic works in the Faculty of Veterinary Medicine on the above-mentioned University of Zagreb and in the Department of Microbiology and Infectious Diseases. On the other hand, his colleague Vladimir Stevanovic is the deputy head of the virology department and specializes in viral zoonotic diseases, which just so happen to include COVID-19. And in fact, the topic of the presentation will be the seroprevalence of SARS-CoV-2 infection in pets and potential public health impacts. And I believe they will be joining us in a very minute, so please don't go away just yet. Well, we've had a pretty good streak this first group of almost having no connection issues so far, but I'm afraid this is the cold, harsh reality of Zoom meetings. Oh, it was well worth the wait, and I believe we have already connected to Professor Lubo Babic. Am I right?
Yes, you are. It's not so international name. It is Lubo, but Lubo is absolutely okay. So greetings from Croatia, and thank you very much for inviting us, all of us, or our group. And it's a really pleasure to be here and to share our results with other colleagues all around the world. So today I will start with my presentation. The topic is occupational risk for SARS-CoV-2 infection as potential public health impact. I have some problem. Okay, can you see Dubrovnik?
Yep, yeah, we can see the presentation.
Excellent. So the first impression about Croatia is probably Adriatic Sea and beautiful town of Dubrovnik, or maybe some of my colleague was in our capital Zagreb, but today we will talk about our faculty of Veterinary Medicine, University of Zagreb. It is an institution with 100 years tradition and with a few decades tradition in One Health research. As a part of our faculty is University Veterinary Hospital. During this pandemic, this hospital works 24/7, all days, and take care about animals. And this is place where we try to resolve some questions, to have some answers. We have a lot of questions in this pandemic. So first of all, it is zoonosis. Everybody knows that, but it's not clarified still. Is that problem only with bats or some other animals? And what is the role of animals in all that? And on the other hand, it is absolutely a disease that is with confirmed interspecies transmission, but it's still lots of question about it. And the logical question is contact with animals risk? And finally, the question is that occupational risk for veterinarian practitioners. And so we try to answer on these questions, and we start with our study on May 25th, 2020, when the COVID epidemic curve was approached at the end of the first wave in Croatia. We collected a total of 122 serum samples from employees of the Faculty of Veterinary Medicine. Our employees, we divide in three groups. First group was animal health service provider, which include veterinary doctor, nurses, technicians, and all staff that are all the time in close contact with animal or with potential contaminated material. Other group is laboratory personnel who had been in contact with animal clinical samples, and something like control group are other employees. Because in that group are included administrative staff and also basic and preclinical science departments personnel who had no known contact with animals or animal clinical samples. So all that serum samples were initially tested for presence of SARS-CoV-2 IgG antibodies. We use serological tests using a commercial ELISA, and all ELISA positive samples were tested with microneutralization test. The results show that in group of animal health service providers, one person was positive, and seroprevalence with ELISA test was 3.6%. In laboratory personnel, again, one was among them was positive, and seroprevalence was 8.3%. And in this group, other, it means administrative staff and other, and basic and preclinical science departments personnel, 4.9% of tested samples were positive. In total, in this group of all our employees, 4.9% of tested samples were positive with ELISA, but no one is confirmed with microneutralization test. So finally, in the same time, on beginning of epidemic and until this 25th May, sampling serum sample were sampling from healthcare workers in Croatia and also in general population in Croatia. It's very interesting to compare that results. The preliminary results in general population is with using the same test, 2.3 seroprevalence, and among healthcare workers was 2.7 of participants. So in our study, seroprevalence was 4.9, when we analyzed all this data, there was no significant difference in seropositivity between employees of our faculty and the general population, or even with healthcare workers, which means that working on university is not risk factor and that protective measures on university are effective. When we analyze the results between this group of our employees, seroprevalence rate was from 3.6 to 8.3%, and also there was no significant difference in seropositivity of administrative staff and people from basic preclinical science departments, with people from animal health service providers and laboratory personnel that was in close contact all the time with animals or clinical samples. So the results of our study strongly suggesting that contact with animals seems not to be a risk factor for SARS-CoV-2 infection in this moment, but because it is not so many people are tested, further large-scale epidemiological studies are required to confirm this observation. So thank you for your attention, and I will use this moment to invite you all in Croatia when epidemiological data will be better than now. I hope this meeting will also contribute for better time for better holidays. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. And now we'll be joining your colleague, Vladimir Stevanovic.
Thank you.
Can you see me?
Yes, welcome, Professor Stevanovic, and please begin at your leisure.
Okay, so I will just continue what my colleague started. I will tackle a bit topic about seroprevalence or prevalence of COVID infection in pet animals. So as we all know by now, there is proposed zoonotic origin of SARS-CoV-2 because of its similarity to bad coronaviruses and its similarity to SARS-CoV-2, SARS-CoV-1 and MERS virus. But in experimental conditions, dogs, ferrets, and cats were permissive to infection, and also infected cats were proven to serve as source of infection for other animals. In field condition, on the other hand, COVID cases in pet animals are, or animals in general, are sporadic. So, but in almost all cases, contact with infected person or shared household with infected person was traced. One of main limitation in diagnostics of COVID cases in animals is possibility that pets are being passive vehicle of the virus. So PCR positive result doesn't confirm an infection. So on the other hand, sero surveys or serological testings could give us better insights in epidemiology of this disease in animals. But as we know, today there is little available information, and only larger scale study has been conducted in China in Wuhan at the beginning of this pandemic. So what our study tried to do is to see how important is COVID in pet animals. We started collecting samples from veterinary facilities in our countries just day after first confirmed human case in Croatia. And altogether, we collected more than 600 dog samples, sera samples, and more than 130 samples of serum of cats. First, we tested all those samples with microneutralization test, and we randomly picked 172 dog serum samples and additionally tested them with in-house ELISA test to rule out cross-reactivity with other coronaviruses of dogs and cats. We also included known positive samples. And as a result, we found neutralizing antibodies in 0.76% of cats and 0.31% of dogs. But there was no significant difference in prevalence of neutralizing antibodies between cats and dogs. Of the 172 randomly selected dog serum samples, 7.56% tested positive. When we followed up date of sampling, first sera samples from positive dogs were sampled on 17th of April, and like 7 weeks after first confirmed case in Zagreb, capital of Croatia, where these dogs were sampled. And highest number of positive dogs originated from a week that was 6 weeks apart from peak in human cases. Altogether, prevalence of ELISA positive dogs were following the number of infected PCR positive people, with no evidence of outbreak among the dog population. And in conclusion, what we found that seropositivity among pet animals in Croatia is low, especially when it's compared with that study that I mentioned at the beginning that was conducted in China, in Wuhan, and compared to 11.6 microneutralization positive cats in that study, we found only 0.76%. Also, what we found that even though we have positive cats, titer was really low compared to really high titers found in Wuhan. On the what was also remarkable, there was no significant difference in prevalence of neutralizing antibodies between cats and dogs. Why is this important? Because experimental studies show that cats are more permissive to infection, but in field condition that was not the case. And small number of seropositive animals, so pet animals with low titer of neutralizing antibodies, suggested at the end that infections in pet animals are rare and are following infections in human population. So this was our study, and this study is still ongoing to see how important pet animals will be for these COVID pandemics.
Thank you very much, professors. And as much as I'd love to take you up on this invitation to this sunny Croatia, I'm afraid we already have another speaker on the line to which we'll attend to. So let's all welcome Professor Mikhail Kostinov from the Michnikov Research Institute of the Russian Academy of Science. Welcome, Professor Kostinov. Can you hear us, Professor?
Да, добрый вечер, да.
Добрый вечер. Да, тогда, пожалуйста, можете начинать, когда вам только удобно.
Я могу начать?
Да, конечно.
Уважаемые коллеги, я буду краток в своем сообщении. Детально вы ее можете найти на сайте, о чем идет речь. Сущность моего сообщения в том, что на сегодняшний день показано, что вакцинация с использованием конъюгированных, или, другими словами, адъювантных вакцин против гриппа, вот оказывает существенный эффект на активацию экспрессии рецепторов врожденного иммунитета, именно касается ТЛР8, ТЛР9, который является ответственным за распознавание РНК вируса. Причем доказано, что вакцины адъювантные, они больше стимулируют экспрессию, чем обычно известны субъединичные вакцины, сплит-вакцины, которые не содержат адъювант. Почему такое дает? Понятно, что адъювант, который входит в состав вакцины, он создан для того, чтобы как раз именно активизировать вот это неспецифические факторы защиты, для того, чтобы было полезно не только в защите от гриппа, но и при встрече с коронавирусом, потому что коронавирус РНК является, и вакцина, и вирус гриппа то же самое является РНКовый вирус. К тому же было доказано в наших исследованиях, в России проведено, что идет еще активация дендритных клеток. А понятно, что дендритная клетка не является ведущей в иммунном ответе при встрече с патогеном. Чем раньше она активизируется, тем вероятнее и благоприятный будет исход при встрече с любым патогеном. Вторую важность, и следует отметить, что, конечно, в России такие существуют две вакцины против гриппа адъювантной, которые в основном выполняется национальный календарь прививок для детей и взрослых именно с этими двумя вакцинами препаратов. Другое важное сообщение хотел тоже доказать, что мы в России занимаемся конъюгированной пневмококковой вакциной, которые по механизму действия, опять доказано в этом исследовании, эта работа была зарегистрирована на международном сайте по клиническим исследованиям, показала, что эта вакцина конъюгированная, она за счет входящего в нее в состав полисахарид, конъюгат, который идет белковый, и еще входит у нее гидроксиалюминиум, сильно активизирует неспецифические факторы защиты, в частности и фагоцитоз, и цитоксические Т-клетки, и гуморальный иммунитет. Причем эта активация параметра иммунитета, неспецифическая, она сохраняется минимум на 1,5-2 месяца. То есть, если проводить вакцинацию сезона против гриппа, и в том числе или против пневмококка, или вместе, мы создаем людей такую возможность для того, чтобы активизировать как раз параметры врожденного иммунитета, что важно при встрече с коронавирусной инфекцией. Это что означает? Что да, человек может заразиться коронавирусной инфекцией, но благодаря быстрому ответу иммунитета, то исход заболевания коронавирусом он может быть благоприятным. Это не является новостью, потому что публикации, которые есть, то, что на сегодняшний день доказано, что те, которые были привиты против коронавирусной инфекции, нуждаются в кислородной терапии на 20% меньше, 8% нуждается меньше в интенсивной терапии. И, конечно, вероятность снижения летальных исходов при вакцинации против гриппа может сказаться при заражении коронавирусом, что эти, например, на 20% летальные исходы меньше. То есть у нас есть возможность, пока нет вакцины против коронавируса, что мы массу применять, и применять обычные вакцины против респираторной инфекции, и тогда создается активация неспецифических факторов защиты, который, с одной стороны, будет стимулировать при встрече с коронавирусом, и вторая часть сами вырабатывает вот этот иммунитет, который против конкретной инфекции, который снижает вот это исходы, то есть уменьшает вероятность благоприятного исхода при коронавирусной инфекции. Вот, в частности, что я хотел ставить в известности для специалистов, что профилактика респираторной инфекции с использованием именно современных адъювантных вакцин против гриппа и конъюгированных пневмококковых вакцин оказывает неспецифический эффект, то, что важно при встрече с коронавирусной инфекцией.
Спасибо большое, профессор, и за ваше участие, и за вашу презентацию. Но сейчас у нас уже на линии профессор Мюллинг, и знаете, но нам уже надо бежать. Спасибо большое.
Удачи, спасибо. До свидания.
And we will soon be joined by Professor Karin Mülling from the Institute of Medical Virology at the University of Zurich.
This was in the 1990s, 1995, 2000. Hi, nice to meet you.
Yeah. Hello,
I'm Karin Mülling. Hi.
Professor Mülling.
This is my first. Situation, I'm trying to say something interesting. And the thing I would like to mention is I'm just writing for the Swiss newspaper summary on vaccines, and there are about 10 vaccines on which is called genetic vaccines. Now you know about Moderna, that's the RNA, which is favored by the United States. Then there's Covax in Tübingen and BioNTech in Mainz in Germany. They are doing RNA vaccines. There are also a couple of groups which are doing DNA vaccines. And my past was in 1995 to 1999 in a couple of papers, many papers, I used a DNA vaccine. I developed it in a plasmid together with a company which was in those days a spin-off of Centocor, which is now Johnson & Johnson. And as I hear, Johnson & Johnson in the United States is making a vaccine with adeno, not a DNA vaccine. What I would like to mention is we had never problems with danger, side effects, no problems with what is called autoimmune diseases, which you could sometimes have with DNA. We had no side effects, and we went very high doses, but we injected 5 times, and then we could show that tumors disappeared. We included GMP material from the company Berna in Switzerland, which doesn't exist anymore. We also used large animals for melanoma for this DNA vaccine. The interesting conclusion, I would say, is the effect is safe, but it's very, very low effect. The immunity was low. We injected 5 times. And I would like to say this because Switzerland is trying to make a genetic vaccine, and they already bought enough so that everybody can have 2 vaccines. So you need to have probably 2, but I would predict you need more. And what is interesting, whoever wants to do it, is we had some long memory effects, very low effect on antibodies, but some effects on memory. And one of them was published in Nature in 1999 by a person by the name Lowry, is the first author, and that was against tuberculosis bacteria immunization. Just for your information, I think it is safe, and I think people must know because they allow this happen very quickly to be applied. We had no autoimmunity responses, but we had some long-range memory cells. That's all I wanted to say. What also I would like to say is a question. I listened to the German newspaper here, a press conference by the German Chancellor yesterday afternoon, which was very good. But I'm asking you, why is it that nobody in the world is really routinely testing for temperature? In SARS-CoV-1 in the year of 2003, temperature measurements by these thermal sensors without touching, that was the main success in finding how to reduce the disease. I think when people are really spreaders, that means maybe on 5 days after infection for 3 or so days, they normally have a fever. You don't have fever if you don't have the disease, and afterwards not much. But at the peak of being very infectious, normally people have some fever. And I would strongly recommend that people really reintroduce the thermal measurements. People here in Switzerland are not doing it. They do it in German hospitals, which is very successful. And it's not an argument, as they say in Germany, people would have some ibuprofen to just reduce their fever. I think that's a bad example. You should not assume people. I think one can rely if somebody is really sick and is really having high virus spread. Normally they have 1 to 3 days some high fever. That's why I recommend this. Another question I have is, I'm a virologist where we have, in the evening, we turn on UV lights to disinfect our clean bench. You could do that to disinfect your whatever room or on the ceiling. And I bought from Amazon, I could buy in Germany a UVC lamp, which even allows automatically switches itself off if somebody passes by, which is very helpful because normally that is not healthy to get with your eyes or with your body under the shining light of UVC. So for 45 euros, you can buy a UVC lamp, which turns off when you pass by. And maybe that's a chance for schools or hospitals when people get ventilations and spread a lot of virus into the rooms. And I would like to really see that this is stressed more. You agree?
Well, I do personally. However,
Say that again?
Well, I would agree with you, Professor, although I am not a specialist.
Yeah, that's okay. But from my understanding, every surgery rooms have these lights. We have it in our clean bench in the university. And I think this may be for not much money. These are two arguments where you can reduce the danger for transfection in schools and so on.
Yeah. So one thing I would ask you to verify, when you were talking about the need to do temperature tests, were you speaking that in the context of medical service, scanning people, or more general? Because, for example, you said that in Switzerland it is not a common occurrence, but speaking from very personal experience, simply living in Poland, which I do not think is a paragon of COVID response, we did have some legislation passed that many service establishments like restaurants, barbershops, and so on, where people gather and some safety measures must be set, they are obliged to check temperatures when people are entering.
Are they? They are not in Switzerland, not a single person. If I entered the hospital, I didn't have to show anything. I even asked them and they told me they can't get the thermometer. You need a thermometer without touching. That's okay. And I said, well, I bought it from Amazon. You can get it immediately. In the US, they check people before they enter the plane. I mean, there's not much flying around, I know. But when I go from Berlin to Zurich, which I do now twice after COVID, I think this is a very simple solution. I didn't know that you are doing that in Poland. You are.
Yeah. So yeah, it's
so I'm bringing codes to Poland.
The difference is just as surprising to me. And given the chance that you're here with us, going forward when dealing with this COVID situation, what do you think would be the probably more effective measure going forward? Vaccination, the creation and spreading of a possible vaccine, or rather the mass screening and testing measures, such as were utilized, for example, in South Korea, perhaps Israel, where the government tested really aggressively to identify possible outbreak sites?
I think as long as we do not have a vaccine, and I think it takes longer than every politician's promise. Even if we have a vaccine in January, you don't know how many people get it, where to distribute it. Nobody has ever prepared a vaccine for 3 billion people. I mean, that's going to take some time. So for the time in between, I think it's a good idea not to do a general testing because that may be too much. It would be a very good idea to keep going and look for local outbreaks because that is the best way how to follow up. And now they're going to ask you to write the correct name. I don't know why they don't do that automatically. I find that ridiculous. Everybody has a passport and people use strange names without giving the real name. I think tracing back is a very important thing for schools, which is now the major concern for everybody. We can't close our schools anymore. I think a good idea is, the UV light I'm suggesting, and also the school should be testing. But there is a fast new test for 15 minutes and nobody is using it yet because they keep saying the new quick test, which takes only 15 minutes and it is 2 companies provided, It is similar to a pregnancy test, but they say you can't do it. And the reason for that is because taking the samples from deep in your throat may be not so easy to do correctly. So you may have wrong negative effects. Of course, nothing is 100%. But if somebody has a high virus titer, this test is good enough. And I think we should have that for schools. So because if there is suspicion or temperature, then you could probably check schools. So I think not everybody should be tested, but testing should be very important for finding the high spreaders. And this is a very important thing. You can't test them all. That's my feeling. And the quick test, I was in charge when we had this quick test for HIV, and it changed epidemiology for HIV. You could test whether your partner you want to meet in a quick sauna, a personal meeting, you could test whether he's negative in 15 minutes. And then you know I'm in risk or I'm out of risk. And this we need to get going. Some people say it's enough to take a throat wash and use that for testing. As soon as that comes, we will have some better ways of testing, for instance, at schools. You can't go through the PCR for a week. I mean, that's ridiculous. Too long. So quick testing, improvement, but the one with two are available, they are already helpful. And they are not very expensive. They should be used in schools and I think also in trains and airplanes. Is that answering your question?
Yes, thank you, Professor. And actually, before we end, I'd like to ask you one more question, and it will be a little provocative this time. When back in the spring, in the February and March, various governments were responding differently as what measures to take. There were the somewhat infamous examples of the Great Britain and Sweden, who claimed to bank on building the herd immunity of the society. Yes. And while we can probably agree it was more of a political excuse than a scientifically motivated decision, speaking long term, while we're already working on developing some solutions to COVID, be it vaccines, be it medicine, be it simply hygiene procedures, and so on. Speaking long term, while we're doing other things, is herd immunity something we should actually be still factoring in, that maybe eventually it will come as we try these other measures, or is it simply a fairy tale, simply a political lie, and we shouldn't ever really seriously count on it?
Well, automatically, some herd immunity testing is going on in, for instance, Brazil or South America, because you can't test them, everybody. You can't do, there's herd immunization, or because people are so packed in their housing. So we will have automatically some kind of a view how this is going to work. I mean, Sweden may have done it better if they had known how bad it is just for a certain population. I mean, the older ones like me, we have a 30% death rate. We have the young ones very low. The young ones, I would propose, should probably get a herd immunity, except they carry it over to the older ones. That is a limiting factor. India is also not doing so badly, but can you trust them? Are they telling you how many people die? I don't think they have the registration kind of thing we have in the Western world. The answer is pretty open. We will find out probably in South America, where you have some kind of automatic herd immunization. It will take longer if we don't let it go. If we really have all these precautions, then the immunization for the whole population is going to take longer. And I think the vaccine is maybe coming up beginning of the next year. But until everybody who wants it, or the elderly have no good immune system, which kind of vaccines do they get? Peptide vaccine, attenuated viruses, viral vectors, whatever. or genetic vaccines. It's very hard to say who gets which one. So that needs to be tested. And then the tests also need to be, the immunization need to be further tested. What kind of immunity? Is it antibody or cellular immunity? It's known in a German study that cellular immunity arises from the previous coronavirus winter sections, which are not special, which are the normal ones. 30% of people, apparently of the population they tested in Berlin, 5,000 people, had any cellular immunity, no antibodies, but they don't know whether this helps or does not help. Most probably it may help a bit. So this is the kind of thing we will find out anyway.
Right. Thank you very much for your answers and participation, Professor. And now I'm happy to say that in case of this third group, we finally managed to make everything smooth and quick enough. We'll actually have the promised questions and answers panel right now following this call. Yes, I see we've got several of our guests on the line, not all of them. So I suppose they're still connecting. I believe you have been sent.
Disconnect, wait for roundtable, and then the roundtable was cancelled, and then I didn't see anything else, and then now we have a roundtable, but I couldn't listen to other people's presentations, so I don't know how we can start talking about something when we couldn't.
I mean, same thing with me.
So what do we do? I mean,
can I? Yes.
Yes, please go ahead. This time is for you, for whatever questions and needs you have.
No, don't know. Maybe the organizer can explain to us.
He was there. He was there to record.
So.
So he's there.
Yeah, he's there. So at least, yeah, okay.
He's on the mute, actually.
Yeah, you're on the mute, so you cannot talk with that. Okay, you are. Mr. COVID-19 conference. That's your name.
Gabor.
Please, what do we do?
Well, this time is simply for you to discuss, ask each other questions.
You're on mute. You're on mute. Hello, hello. You're on mute.
You have to demute.
You're on mute.
Oh, yeah. Sorry. Yeah.
We cannot hear you.
Can you hear me now?
We cannot hear you.
Oh, studio, please fix
no, you
my voice.
Cannot hear you. Okay. Mr. COVID-19 conference, we cannot hear you.
Test.
Or you are talking to somebody else? I don't know. We can see your face.
Am I hearable now? Can you hear me, gentlemen?
Perfect.
Yes, now I can. Now we better.
Okay. Yeah. So basically, this discussion or question answers panel is really mostly space provided to you to talk, ask about anything that happened. Basically, if this was a real physical conference like we used to have in previous years, this is where we'd be getting the free food and chatting with each other. And this is the best way we can facilitate this kind of space for you to discuss these matters with colleagues online.
So,
this doesn't solve the problem. This doesn't solve the problem. We don't have agenda. We don't have the topics. We don't know what the other colleagues presented. So what the goal of this? It's a coffee. It's just a coffee break.
Oh, well then, if there are no pressing matters you need to get off your chest, there are several we can gladly ask. First, how about, as right now we are speaking, we're going into the typical seasonal flu season of autumn, and everyone pretty much expects the infection rate to go back up after the summer. The situation is that people in many countries across the world simultaneously are somewhat tired of many stricter measures that were enforced in spring, like the strict quarantine, or even, to be frank, the washing and disinfecting hands, people are getting lazy about it. But then again, there are some measures that manage to stay intact, like the mask regime really came into force, and everyone's, at least in our experience, are still wearing them. So how do you think this autumn season will fare compared to the spring, where on the one hand we know more, we should be better prepared, but then again we probably cannot replicate the same strictness of certain measures that we could in spring, where there was more of a panic about this upcoming plague?
This is the question. Okay. So.
Sir,
Go ahead.
I mean, both are John kind of thing. John. So, the problem is.
You're losing your voice.
My voice is okay. I was talking about with the other viruses. So, because multiple corona is there, and the same thing happens, and that is what I'm connecting both and
We cannot hear you. I'm sorry, we cannot hear you. Jean-Claude, can you hear?
I mean, Jean-Claude, you can hear?
What is meaning? What is big at the beginning? Your voice is clear, and then it fades immediately.
All the time.
I don't know what happens. You start talking, it's clear, and then it's not clear anymore.
But because earlier he said, "Come close so you can hear."
No, that's it.
That's what I'm doing too. Can you? Because where is the microphone?
We cannot hear you. I'm sorry. That's complicated. Okay.
So once you read my presentation, you can tell him. Can you? I mean, see, he is listening me. So conference person.
This is a presentation here, international. No. Where is the presentation? I don't see the presentation.
I mean, nobody is. I do not know anybody is. So, COVID conference person. Can you send presentation to others? Can you send the presentation to others?
I can ask the studio staff to send the professor's presentation to others via link, perhaps, so he could better illustrate his point.
Yeah, for me, there is no problem. There is no data from mine. There is no my data.
Oh, I'm getting the response from studio that we would be able to provide you with the presentations, but regrettably not immediately. We could provide it after this panel, for example, during the break, because of some technical limitations.
I don't understand. We are going to look at the presentation now. So
no,
that's going to take forever.
It's impossible to provide a presentation.
Yeah,
right
no,
now.
no.
I have a more general question for the organizers. Will the
hello?
Will the presentation, will the conference will be available on the internet, on the web?
Yeah.
That's a great question. Please wait a second as we confirm with the organizers whether it will be archived or available publicly.
Yeah, it needs to be because we don't know. We don't have the document. We don't have any material except our own material. So that's a problem. And then you come with a question about this, what's happened with this flu season, etc. This is a huge, big question. We cannot talk about that for people without any document, you know. And you mentioned, so it's complicated. I don't see how we can handle this. The 5 of us, the 6 of us, somebody join again.
Yeah,
So,
I understand. And responding to your question, yes, as far as I understand, the contents of the conference will be available later.
Yeah, it's important, but this is the future. This is not now. What do we do now?
Hello.
Hello?
Hello, we can hear you.
I can hear you.
Yeah, okay, very good.
Yeah, so gentlemen, ladies, if please wait a second. I'm getting some. Yes, I'm getting confirmation that there will be a dedicated group and discussion later on. And right now in this panel, yes, there will be a later dedicated working group and a larger discussion, and this is a space for this group of speakers on this, well, let's call it the working group within the confines of this conference to possibly discuss a couple questions and exchange some ideas between yourselves and your colleagues. But basically a space to exchange some ideas, network a bit, perhaps. Like, for example, do you, with some scientists, warning that this kind of happening, well, maybe not of this scale, but epidemics will be coming more and more often, similarly to, for example, extreme weather due to our climate and environmental change. Do you think the current struggle against COVID-19 could impart a larger change in how we think about diseases specifically? Because, for example, many countries were simply put unprepared for the coming of pandemic this side. It turned out they, for example, had absolutely no reserves of personal protection equipment, that many services were underfunded, that basically nobody cared. Everybody thought, when the time comes, then we'll worry. And we're already seeing some things like the culture of wearing masks spreading from being pretty much an typically Asian phenomenon also to the Western world. So, in your opinion, do you think are there things that will really change in how we as societies, as countries, perceive pandemics, how we plan, prepare for them? Or would you expect a more pessimistic scenario where as soon as we finish dealing with this one specific disease, it's off to history books and it's all back to normal like it was before? Like, if I may bring an example, our two professors from Africa told about how the 2014 Ebola pandemic drastically changed how African countries treated pandemics, how they had infrastructures. And of course, it wasn't the first and it won't be the last pandemic in Africa. But this was the one that really changed the approach. And the COVID, with how big it is right now globally, do you think it will, what we're doing in response to it, that it will have the same staying power for the societies at large?
Well, I don't know. Everybody just answers.
Yeah, as usual.
Yes.
I think what is likely for a pandemic is something which is airborne, which is transmitted by breathing, speaking, singing, crying, air blowing. But in principle, what is the main thing you need to be prepared for? It's not so easy to predict. For instance, do we always need ventilators for lung diseases? Maybe for other diseases, we need other things. It's difficult to predict, but we should really be much better prepared by immediately reacting if something is happening somewhere else in the world. As a virologist, I was surprised when the new coronavirus popped up. I was not immediately thinking it would come to Europe. I thought it's going to be a Chinese problem, maybe Singapore, and maybe some escape, but I did not immediately think this could happen to us in Europe, to be very honest. And this is a lesson I think we all learned.
Thank you, Professor. Does
if I may? Yeah.
Of course, of course. I was just about to ask.
I mean, if we have to go over this, we were not prepared. We know exactly this type of virus for years, for centuries. For the Ebola, we were not prepared. And our African colleagues succeed because funding is a fundamental. If you don't have funding, you cannot be prepared. And if you want to be prepared, you need a politics and funding. So if they don't want to be prepared for the next coronavirus, some agencies here in the US are preparing for the next one, for the coronavirus 21 or 22. And this is the idea, but you need a funding at the beginning. So nobody in the world was prepared. And when we learn, so from Hippocrates, that was my presentation, from Louis Pasteur, from Robert Koch, we know that wearing a mask, distancing, quarantine, this is classical. We know that for centuries, but we didn't apply for it, and there is no politics for that.
I agree with
you.
you.
That's a fundamental of the things. It's not about the coronavirus transmitted by aerosol, etc. It's not about that. This is easy. We know that. We know this problem of transmission. So this is clear politics and diplomacy.
What about the mask? I think what happened in Germany in that respect was lying, and that was misleading to the public. I'm very upset about the politics about the mask, which everybody knows they are so helpful in Eastern countries. I couldn't believe it happened.
Clear. And this is clear. We know the in terms of science, we have all the tools and knowledge. It's not a problem. The only problem is integration, interconnection, talk. The politics has to talk to them. Here in the US, that's the first time I saw a president talking with a scientist, and he talked with the scientist for a few weeks. And then he said, okay, this is not the solution. I'm smarter than the scientist. So that's a complication. So this we need, and that's why I'm promoting this One Health approach: science, politics, economy, social. The people need to be educated to wear the mask. They don't know to wear the mask. They are not in the laboratory all the time. We know, but they don't know.
I'm being laughed
education.
at. I'm laughed at when I wear my mask in some places in Germany.
Okay, I'm talking too much, but I think the mask, it's a fundamental, the distancing, there is no way around, quarantine is perfect, and the vaccine is just a dream for next year. So think about now. We have to resolve the problem now, not next year, no wait for the vaccine. And the therapy exists also. The serology exists for years and years and years, and our colleague in Africa use it. So it's more in terms of integrating all this power, all this potential, politics, economy, diplomacy, science, etc., and work together. This is my position, and we have to learn about to work together. That's the main thing.
Yes, and speaking of this inevitable really topic of the political forces that really shape our availability to deal with the pandemic, to counter it, to take measures. I'd say while in the first months of COVID spreading, the adverse forces were pretty much what we'd expect, that some countries like, let's say, Japan or Great Britain simply failed to provide the kind of response with hope they did, and then made some excuses, made some explanations, and so on. But I think a very interesting and rather troubling case is the United States of America, where protective measures itself, like wearing mask, went beyond the matter of believing in their efficiency, but essentially became a partisan political matter, like with people specifically rejecting the act of wearing mask just because that other political party wants you to do it. And you could say that doing that in spite of literal evidence right before their eyes. How would we as scientific committee even try dealing with such a situation we're finding ourselves in?
Education, education, that's it, period. You have to educate your president. He needs to be educated. He needs to know about that. I mean, this is pretty simple for me. It's not, but we need the willingness of these people to do that. And I'm just, for example, the place where the risk is very high, okay? Number one on the top of the list, we have the numbers now. The number one, restaurant. And now we have a problem in south of France with the restaurant. People are not educated, why not? And it's not their fault.
Would someone else would like something to add to that? Yeah, please go ahead.
Did other people, this lady? Yeah.
Yeah, sure.
So, my opinion for future of this epidemic, I think this new virus will a usual respiratory virus in future, and we will meet it in when child will meet this virus at first, and then this virus will usual one of many respiratory viruses. It will be in future, I think. It's my opinion. But just now we have to care, and we have to defend elderly people and people with chronic disease. It's my opinion.
Thank you very much. So perhaps one thing I would add, maybe in counter to Professor Gonzalez claim that education is such key, is that I would also point to the problem of discipline, of enforcing these measures. Because even in the countries where the public response was strong, where people started social distancing, working from home, and so on, well, we're barely half a year later, and everyone's already bored, already impatient. Everyone starts meeting with friends, going to restaurants, and so on, even though they didn't before, even though they know better. And basically, as soon as these really dramatic sights like the intense pandemic in northern Italy passed from the TV screens, basically, as soon as the situation got somewhat under control, everyone became lax, including Italy, which you'd think was one of the most determined countries at certain points, but people simply got tired and bored, and we're only half a year in. We don't yet have a real response to COVID. It's all in the middle, and we're already starting to have problems enforcing the discipline of social distancing and quarantining.
Can I talk?
Of course, please go ahead.
So, I mean, in addition to the spreading the infection, one has to talk about the economy, because lots of people are poor now.
We can't hear him.
Yes.
What is the problem?
Yeah,
what should be done about that?
We don't know, frankly. It's some technical issue that's stumbling us.
So can I talk?
Because if you are, I will have to search for my home somewhere like that.
Why don't you start and he gets...
We cannot hear you. Corey,
Yes,
you cannot hear you.
Yeah, it is the money.
I mentioned that about the fundings, but we cannot hear you.
Money is the problem.
Yeah, I told you.
No, it is the money.
Yeah, but who?
So that is the issue. I mean, nothing more than that.
Yeah, but who got the money? Who had the money?
What about money? I don't understand.
No, everybody needs the money.
Needs money for what?
For good internet transmission.
I don't understand.
Yeah, so perhaps, Professor Kang, you had something to say a minute before.
Can I say something?
Please go ahead.
Okay, so I'm Dong Yanjin from Hong Kong, and I agree that public compliance is important. So actually in Hong Kong, and the viral transmission, the viral activity remain low, even though we do have a second wave. I mean, the first wave is actually from the mainland. The second wave is actually from returning students. And then the third wave is from the pilots and also the seamen who came to work in Hong Kong. However, we still, even though we have 3 different waves of COVID-19 in the past few 9 months, the viral transmission remain low, and the public compliance is important. And we managed to actually keep almost everything as, close to normal, but still have some social distancing, ban of restaurants and other things. And on the other hand, if we can do a better job to protect the elderly and those in the hospital, like what Singapore can actually achieve. So in Singapore, it's almost the same population as in Hong Kong. They have 50-some thousand cases, but they only have 27 deaths. If we can achieve that, that's even less severe.
How come that? Explain. How come?
So one important thing is that they contain the outbreak only in the immigrant workers who are mainly from South Asia. They are those construction workers. They are young. They are healthy. So actually, they can. The wild activity in their community remain low, and they protect their elderly. They protect their hospital, so that they can achieve that. 27 deaths among 50-some thousand cases. Actually, in Hong Kong, in our first wave, second wave, the case fatality is also very, very low. It's only in the third wave when it come to our elderly caring homes that caused the rise in the number of deaths. Still, it is not very high. It is only 50 among 5,000 cases. So, so that's to say that if we can do that, then we can actually make it like a cold or even less severe than influenza. So actually in Hong Kong, we have, if it is H3N2, then we have hundreds, at least 300 deaths each year. But now we don't even have the flu season. The seasonal flu is gone because of social distancing.
Yes.
We don't know whether in the winter we may still have a flu season, but in the last flu season just ended immediately after social distancing. But I do still have a question about Italy. So maybe some of you can help answer that. And that is actually not in northern Italy, whether the herd immunity has actually developed.
No,
because there are some data saying that the antibody is 56%, but other studies were saying that it is only maybe 20 or 30%. So whether herd immunity has indeed developed in northern Italy, that's my question.
I'm not from Italy, but I don't know these numbers. I mean, there's not herd immunity, number one. There's no herd immunity in the humanity. It's immune protection, natural immunity. So it's not like it's different. I mean, this installation, the development of the immunity, of the global immunity, it's a different mechanism than with the immunity in animals. So this is a question, and the secondary question is about the numbers you have are the numbers that have been detected. It's not the real number. We know the symptomatic is probably from 30 to 50%. So this is complicated. This is in terms of natural protection of the people and the protection, the immune protection after getting the disease. It's not so simple to understand. Why I understand not very clearly from your point of view in Hong Kong, how you did that? How did you succeed to have so a few people infected, a few deaths? Here mostly in the democratic country, we are focusing on the elderly, on the people that are more vulnerable first, and then we go for the workers, and then we go for the other. You have a political strategy. So this is, I don't understand exactly which type of tools and strategy you develop in Hong Kong to have such good results.
Yes, good question. Yes, good question.
So actually, the death rate is even much lower in Singapore, which is even better than in Hong Kong. In Hong Kong, after we have the first wave, second wave is still okay. But in this third wave, because it hit our elderly caring home heavily, then the death goes up. But still, it's very low. It's not like in many other in Europe, for example. So how we can achieve that is still a very democratic way. It's not like in China that they stop everything. We still keep a relatively normal life. The universities are largely open. And it's actually very crowded in the buses and in the metro, but we try really hard to protect the hospitals and the elderly caring homes. So they actually, all the employees there, they will undergo regular checkup, and so we actually closely do the contact tracing so that we can stop the transmission early. And the funny part is actually, we actually do believe the whole third wave now have like 5,000 cases. 4,000 of them are actually belong to this third wave. It's probably due to one single super spreading event. So the super spreading is actually a very important part in the transmission of COVID. And because actually we have 4 different sources in this third wave, but one from Philippines, another one from Pakistan, another one from Hassan, the pilot. But actually, only one of these sources can sustain the transmission. The other 3 sources, they just die out. Less than 20 got infected. But this one single source, it finally infect 4,000 and maybe more because of the asymptomatic cases. So the most important part is actually to keep track of the super spreader. If we can keep track of the super spreader, then we can actually have a much better outcome.
Can I ask you?
Which one is the super spreader?
Are normally not a special kind of diseases. They are normally at the height of their infectivity. Do you agree? It's just the time point of their disease development that makes them super spreaders. It's an event by those who are highly virus producing. It's not a special, a special variant of the disease, right?
You are right. So that probably is not because of there is a highly transmissible strain, but it could be due to both the environmental factors, because, for example, if a lot of virus was shedding, and also it might due to the host. So one famous case in the 2003 of Hong Kong, the SARS outbreak of Hong Kong is due to one single patient. He's doing kidney dialysis, and then he is actually immunosuppressed. He's immunocompromised. So that's why that the virus go to extremely high titer, so that this one single person infect 150 other neighbors in the community, and that actually spread the virus to many other places. Toronto, Taiwan, Beijing, elsewhere. So that's actually due to the immunocompromised status of the patient. And so the super spreading is a rare event, but it could be due to environmental, and it also could be due to the host immunity. And one important thing to know is that this single super spreader, the second generation and probably the third generation could still be transmitted very strongly. So even for those that who receive the virus from this super spreader, then they could also spread. So actually, in our third wave, it is this one single person, probably from Philippines, and then he or she transmit these to several others, and these others, they through this dinner gathering, because we have 50 some days zero cases, zero confirmed cases, so people are happy, and they just got this fatigue, and then they just relax, and they do the dinner gathering and gathering to celebrate the return of Hong Kong to China, and all these groups, and then it was spread to those clusters, and all in a sudden it got outbreaks. So it's one super spreader pass on to several other super spreader.
Yeah, that's the super spreader. We know exactly what it is for years and years. This is not like this, you know. You have not one super spreader, 100 super spreader. Doesn't work. I mean, the COVID transmission is totally different, you know. It's very rare. The super spreader with the high viremia are not spreading more to their nose or to their saliva. This is about transmission. The SARS was unique situation. That's different. We are in different situation. Same type of virus, different situation, completely different situation. More infectious and less virulent. SARS was less infectious and more virulent. Different situation. MERS is another situation. The super spreaders doesn't play here. What it's playing now, it's a gathering, mass gathering, all the restaurant and people coming together. That's a problem. If we don't solve this problem, we will not solve this pandemic.
I really hope we'll be able to pick up this topic of super spreaders, which is both very interesting and important here. But however, I'm afraid that right now we'll have to take a break to prepare for the next group of our experts that we'll see in about half an hour.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Right. Thank you. That was very interesting about Hong Kong. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. And thank you for participating in our conference.
Thank you.
So yes, as we've said, we'll be back in about half an hour at 7 p.m. Central Eastern European Time with our next fourth group of experts with following series of presentations.